Hi everyone, this is Josh, and I'm gonna be reviewing a superhero movie today, I guess. Glass was written and directed by M. Night Shyamalan. There is so much to say about this guy, he could get his own video alone, honestly. M. Night Shyamalan is an American screenwriter, actor, producer, and director. This guy started his career very strong in the late 90s and early 2000s with films like The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, and Signs, all of which were received fairly well and did pretty well at the box office. I liked all of those films personally. His next film, The Village, wasn't that great, but it's also not terrible. I think a lot of people hated it because it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. I actually enjoyed watching it a lot as a 13 or 14-year-old when it came out. Maybe I wouldn't feel that way if I watched it now, but as it stands, it has some nostalgic value for me, so I still kind of like it. In my opinion, things really started to take a turn for the worse for M. Night Shyamalan with his next film, Lady in the Water. That movie was so dumb. It had a terrible story, terrible performances, the dialogue was just god-awful. That was his first genuinely bad film. But at that time, it still seemed like he could turn things around and go on to make another good film again. It didn't seem like he was just gonna go on to make a bunch of shitty films in a row. Nope. Instead, he went on to direct 3 shitty films in a row that all got panned by fans and critics alike. God, The Happening was such a waste of my life. It wouldn't be until 2015 that M. Night Shyamalan would go on to have some mild success and praise with The Visit, a Blumhouse found footage horror film that I have not seen. Regardless of whether that movie is good or not though, I did really like his next film, Split, a great thriller about a person who experiences dissociative identity disorder. It reminded me a lot of his earlier work where you had some good performances, some solid direction, and a mysteriously engaging story. It's not perfect, but I really enjoyed that movie for the most part. The only thing I hated about it was the fact that it connects itself to this new movie at the end. I knew at the time that if this sequel was going to suck, then it would be really disappointing and really hard for me to dissociate this new shitty film with Split, an otherwise very good film that should have just been left alone. Now, as it turns out, Unbreakable was originally supposed to include James McAvoy's character from Split, but as M. Night Shyamalan got to his final draft, he ended up cutting that character because he didn't fit into the story. So, because there was some genuine crossover between those two stories written years ago, there was potential for a legitimate sequel to both Split and Unbreakable. Glass brings the characters of Split and Unbreakable together for the first time. It features Beast, played by James McAvoy, Mr. Glass, played by Sam Jackson, and David Dunn, played by Bruce Willis, who all have special abilities. The plot of Glass is pretty simple and straightforward. These 3 characters are seen as criminals, so they're rounded up and taken to a psychiatric hospital where a doctor there, played by Paulson, is trying to convince them that they're not actually superheroes and their powers are in their head. To start off with the better things about this film, I thought both the cinematography and the soundtrack were pretty solid. Colors are used in a way in this film to communicate the relationships between different characters, which I thought was kind of on the nose, but still pretty cool and clever. There's a couple of shots in this film that were really well done, including a panning shot that happens in the earlier part of this film, where James McAvoy is in this warehouse and the camera just follows his movement in a circle. I can't give you much details beyond that, but it's a longer take and I thought it was pretty cool. The first third of this movie does have its issues, but I still thought it moved well enough and it made enough sense for it to be engaging. Honestly, I didn't feel too bored watching this film, which is a complaint a lot of people had about it. I was surprised I didn't feel very bored because most of this film takes place in a hospital. It is very isolated, consisting mostly of dialogue scenes and not action scenes, which is totally okay because Unbreakable and Split didn't have a whole lot of action. I think it was the concept that kept my attention for this film. I like the idea of reversing the outcome of Split and Unbreakable and have these characters question if they really are superheroes after going through so much in the previous films to believe they were superheroes. But because it's already been established that these 3 main characters do have special observable abilities, walking all of that back at this point convincingly wouldn't be impossible, but still really difficult to pull off. I guess I commend M. Night Shyamalan for being ambitious with this story and tackling this concept, but he was not up for the task. I'm gonna have to go into story details now to explain why M. Night Shyamalan failed with this movie, so if you don't want to hear any of that and you just want to hear my grade, then go to this point in the video and you won't hear any spoilers. So 3, 2, 1, let's go. I guess Mr. Glass doesn't actually have superpowers. He just has really brittle bones and he's really smart, but David Dunn and Beast do have superpowers, and this film does a terrible job of trying to convince you that they don't. Part of that has to do with the fact that Sarah Paulson's character was never believable when she was trying to persuade these characters that they're normal. She's a good actress too, but her performance is so one-dimensional, and it's so obvious that she's trying to manipulate these characters. Beast calls out Sarah Paulson's bullshit halfway into the film and recalls how he bent steel bars with his bare hands and survived a shotgun blast and split. Like, what else do you need to know? And she's like, oh, well, you know, we examined the steel bars and they were actually really old, so they weren't that strong. And the shotgun cartridges, they were old and defective too, so it's not really a big deal. Yeah, okay. In this film, both James McAvoy and Bruce Willis are put into these rooms that are meant to suppress their abilities. If you're trying to play this mind game and convince them that they don't have powers, then why are you putting them in rooms that are specifically designed to prevent them from using their powers that they supposedly don't have? Beast is in this room where these flashing lights will go off that triggers him to switch personalities in case he tries to go berserk and escape. And Bruce Willis's room has these high-powered water hoses that spray and weaken him in case he tries to escape. By doing that, aren't you feeding into the fact that they do have superpowers? I'm so confused. On top of the film's failure to execute its concept, a lot of the story doesn't make any sense. If Beast really wanted to get out of the room and not have the light affect him, why didn't you just cover your eyes, dumbass? And it doesn't make any sense for water to be David Dunn or Bruce Willis's literal weakness as this film insists. In Unbreakable, water wasn't necessarily Bruce Willis's weakness. It was the fact that he didn't know how to swim very well. If water is his literal weakness, then does he not drink water? Does he not take showers? Does he not wash his hands after taking a piss? That's fucking gross. While I'm on the subject, Bruce Willis's character as a whole felt so absent and removed from the film, partly because his character doesn't have anything to do, and also because his performance is so bad. Some of the better scenes in this movie involve the flashbacks, which were actual scenes taken directly out of Unbreakable, where we see a younger Bruce Willis acting and emoting. When the film cuts back to the present, it is so fucking obvious that he's not putting any effort into this performance because we saw him actually trying to act a second ago. The only person who was good performance-wise was James McAvoy. Everyone else is either mediocre, poorly directed, or so fucking poorly written that their character doesn't even have an effect on the story. God, this movie feels like a first draft. Some of the dialogue is laughably bad and painfully pedantic. There's a hilarious scene when one of the staff of the psychiatric hospital goes in for a late night shift and has a conversation with a security guard about nutrition.
Hey man, you keeping up with your nutrition? You gotta take vitamin D, man. That's really important. You staying hydrated, man? Yeah, that's important. You gotta drink water.
Some of the most terrible dialogue happens between Mr. Glass and his mother, played by Charlayne Woodard. The makeup on her is so terrible, it looks like she has cellulite on her face. They have some weird conversations earlier in the movie about how Mr. Glass loved limited edition comic books with a final showdown or a final fight at the end. And as he's dying towards the end of this film, he says something really cheesy like, "Oh mama, this wasn't a limited edition. This was an origin story the whole time." Ugh. To see Samuel Jackson deliver this dialogue is just really embarrassing. M. Night Shyamalan does the same annoying shit he did in Lady in the Water, where he'll have a character explain to you what writing tricks and tropes are being used in a scene. This happens when Bruce Willis tries to defend Sam Jackson from James McAvoy at one point, and Sam Jackson says something like, "Oh, the classic turn. The hero sides with his enemy." This happens so many times where a character will get meta and talk about a comic book story and the tropes of comic book stories as if the audience doesn't know anything about comics. Are you aware that we live in a time when at least 5 superhero movies come out a year? It's not clever, it's not smart, it's just stupid, and it makes M. Night Shyamalan look so full of himself. He insists on putting 3 twists into this movie. The whole shit with Sarah Paulson being a part of the secret Cloverleaf Society crap or whatever was really stupid, and it didn't make any sense. You find out at the end that Sarah Paulson is a part of some secret society that suppresses the knowledge of superheroes to the public, as that would encourage people to become superheroes, which would throw off the balance and make society unstable. So because she fails to convince these 3 main characters that they're not superheroes, she just ends up having them killed in the most anticlimactic way possible. Bruce Willis dies by this guy dunking his head into a puddle and drowning him. It was the dumbest shit in the world. But it turns out that Samuel Jackson had anticipated dying beforehand, so he hacked the computers of the hospital after sneaking out of his room, and live streamed the security camera footage of David Dunn and Beast doing a bunch of superhero shit to the internet. I want to quickly point out that it makes no sense how Samuel Jackson is able to escape his room repeatedly in a hospital where only one guard is watching all three of these characters. Like, you couldn't get at least like three? I guess the government shutdown affected that hospital too. So this random society and Sarah Paulson still fail at the end after killing the three main characters, when they could have just killed them earlier instead of doing a terrible job of trying to manipulate them. All of this shit about this secret society is explained within the span of 10 minutes, and I didn't care about any of it. Glass is just a goofy, bizarre, and overly convoluted movie that is nowhere near as good as Split or Unbreakable. This isn't the most terrible thing M. Night Shyamalan has made, but it's still pretty fucking bad. I'm gonna give Glass a 1.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching this review, guys. I really appreciate it. Please leave your thoughts on Glass in the comment section below. Leave a recommendation on a film that I should watch and review next while you're down there. Be sure to check out the other content on my channel. I got plenty of other reviews you might be interested in watching, including my previous review of If Beale Street Could Talk. Hit the like button if you like this video, or share this video, or both, whichever you prefer. I don't care. And as always, if you dig the channel, then subscribe to the channel. Thanks again, ladies and gentlemen. That was a long review. I will see you next time.